Hi, it's Jen, and welcome back to Better by the Day. We're going to be doing something a little different today. I'm going to actually be starting a series as this has been developing and people have been reaching out, and because I'm seeking a permanent provider for benzodiazepine. I'll be doing the tapering myself. Maybe not, maybe not. I'm going to do something a little different in that as I'm looking for a new established doctor, I want to see if they would be willing on that first consult to actually let me record some of the answers to my questions. But as this has been going along, there's been a lot of questions, and I kind of came right out of the gate. I was just so furious at what the last psychiatrist, neuropsychiatric clinic of Atlantis, or they go by neuropsychiatric clinics online. They now have a pending lawsuit. It was really that dramatic. I mean, if you have a major firm that's going, oh, yes, yes, and following up and asking you to come to the office and get documents and bring documents and looking for other expert witnesses, you know you have a case. But let me go back. However many series it takes, this is going to be part one of how the whole benzodiazepine journey started. So in order to really explain how I got there and share why I'm here, and your story may differ a little from mine. There are people that had never taken a pill or a drug in their life prior to being prescribed these. There's a million different case scenarios. This one happens to be mine, and I also realize it's very common. I hear it in a lot of the benzodiazepine testimonies. So I have to revisit my childhood. It does get more complicated if there is post-trauma or there was trauma involved in it, and that was certainly the case in mine. As I said, I'm Jennifer. I am 62 years old. I was born in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1963. It was my mother's second marriage. She had my two older siblings from her first husband, and she was a widow when she met my father. She got pregnant with me. It was 1963. I guess she felt, you had to get married, and it kind of was the time we had to do that. So it was a blended family. My father was indeed an alcoholic, highly functional, went to work every day, loved his children. There was something about mom. I'm hearing Maureen Callahan from The Nerve. She's doing a whole series on adult children who had mothers that may have been borderline or had some type of undiagnosed mental illness. But my case was really strange in that it was only me. It's understandable, out of four children, it's understandable in that she got pregnant, and my father was married with three children when this happened. And I think she felt like she had to get married. At the time, I know she was kind of crazy about my father. He was a real good looking guy. She stayed with him for 8 years. But still, I think as the alcoholism progressed and the marriage fell apart, it's really interesting in that it's usually the alcoholic that has the tendency to be violent. And why I remember a few inappropriate behaviors towards the end of the marriage, it was her. It was mom. Now, she wasn't a drinker. She wasn't involved in drugs. And she wasn't this way around everybody. I mean, her children would definitely see these angry, violent outbursts, but they were centered towards me. in that I'm the only one of the four of us she actually hurt physically. Like, and I'm talking real young. My first conscious memory is of having my head hit again. We had a little flagstone walkway, and I remember having my head smashed in over and over and over again. I forget what set her off. For years, I thought that may have been a false memory until I got pregnant with my first son and had a baby shower. And I had a surprise guest. I was just so thrilled to see. I grew up with it was a big family of 10 kids, and they all had somebody the age that coincided with the four of us. So the one that was my age, Patty, um, we used to go over each other's houses and play. We were little friends, would have play dates. And she remembered that. She brought that up at my shower. And that was the time she ran home absolutely terrified. I mean, out of 10 of them, none of them had ever seen anything like that in their lives. And she was forbidden to even come back to my house, as most friends were as they went along, because that didn't even stop her. The fact that somebody else's child was there was something about me. You know what? I think paternity definitely matters with your children. Yes, you can love all your children equally, but you're going to love them differently. That's just a fact. And something that will filter into that is their paternity. Um, but I mean, things didn't start going really bad till about 3 or 4 years. Yet her rage was directed at me while I was still in diapers. Um, the screaming like at the top of her lungs, and like just the horrible things she would say. This wasn't going on with the other kids. It was solely directed at me as a baby. There were things that happened later on. I was still prepubescent, so I don't know where the line comes where I'm responsible for that. And I think I've landed in a place where I just never was. It happened and started happening so young. The next memory I have, these like beatings were a pretty regular thing, along with the verbal attacks. And the next one I remember was, my father was kind of realizing what was going on with me. They had another baby, my younger sister, when I was 4 years old. So the marriage, obviously, I remember she told me she was hoping to keep him home more. He had joined a golf course, and he was out of the house way too much. And as an adult, I remember asking her, why did you go on to have another child if the marriage was so miserable? And we were able to talk. You obviously resented me. And that was her answer. She wanted to keep him home more, and get him away from the golf course. So they went on to have my younger sister. And she was neglected beyond a shadow of a doubt, but there was no physical abuse. And she also kept her throughout her lifetime. I was given away at 13. As soon as she found out you can actually sign your children over to the state, I mean, today we all would have gotten whipped out of the house and taken away from her. Let me stop for just a minute, because I really do want to acknowledge the fact that by the time I was an adult with my first marriage, this was resolved as best as it could be. She gave me 1 hour to just talk freely and actually ask what that was like for me. And she made her apology. I gladly accepted it. That's all I ever wanted. I just wanted to be close to her, like my older sister was. She also played a big, big role in the abuse. I think, we're really dealing with a lot of narcissism. she wasn't narcissistic. My mother, in her overall personality, eh, with her behavior with me, and let me take it back because I can give a lot of examples where she did, and like my older sister, she just lost friends along the way. Um, Basically thinking she was just above them, and my sister kind of the same way, um, feeling that people were beneath her. uh, According to my niece, she has a set of new friends and she doesn't look at addiction like that at all, and she's so supportive. um, but again, these behaviors were only directed at me. I'm glad her daughters don't know her as she is and as she was and is with me from birth. From birth. There was just a profound abuse. I think there was a lot of jealousy and resentment. I mean, she's a beautiful woman till this day. Just the blonde hair and the beautiful blue eyes. And I think she was just the apple of my mother's eye. And when my mother had to divide her attention to a new baby and a new stepfather, she clearly resented it. And she too was a child, and she was parentified in a lot of ways, especially after the divorce, which took place when I was 8 years old. She did get stuck babysitting a lot, but she's very, very bright. And we're talking like 16, 17, 18 years old. And everybody's brain develops at different rates. They're now going up to 25, but I would say she had a fully developed, intelligent brain by 16, 17, 18. There was also an older brother, God rest his soul, that passed away from multiple myeloma in 2007, who was just very protective and loving, and also, though, rightfully and understandably, just wanted to get out of that house as soon as possible. So he married his childhood sweetheart and really never looked back, but he always loved his sisters, especially his little sisters. And I want to say, like, especially me, because he knew I was the only one that she would hurt like that. But anyway, as the marriage was nearing an end, and my father was well aware that his child was not safe in her care. The poor guy, he has to go out to work, right? But he would call all day, and if nobody would pick up, he would just keep calling. I just feel so bad for him. He passed away in 1999, but going through all that with a budding alcoholism, and struggling with that, and like I said, still highly, highly functional, and loving his little girls very much. Even my younger sister would never dispute that in a million years. But I know he had a special sense of protection when it came to me, because I was the only one that was physically harmed that severely and that young. So the second bad one that I remember is he was doing that. He was calling all day. And in the beginning, I remember she would just pick up the phone and hang it up. And so he would just continue to call, which drove her crazy. Absolutely triggered everything in her. And once in a while, she would let me call. If it was a day she didn't hurt me and she seemed relatively calm, or she was sleeping, or whatever the case may be, she would, or sometimes she was asleep, and she would just let me pick up the phone. Hi, Daddy. I miss you too. Love you too. I'm okay. Mommy's sleeping. You know. But this one day, I could tell. I could tell she was just in a mood. I think the two older siblings were home. I know the older sister was, And, she repeatedly said, don't you dare pick up that phone. And I was scared. I knew something bad was going to happen. As a child, you just learn and you try to not make a mistake and do everything right. Because you need this person in order to survive. You need them to feed you and shelter you and take care of you. And if that feels threatened and you realize this parent is not capable or is dysfunctional in any way, you have to, the brain wants to make sense out of everything. So we take it in and we blame ourselves no matter how young we are. I must be the bad seed, especially when you have a sibling reinforcing that all the time, you know, and, watching my older brother trying to undo that, even reinforced it more that no, I even as a little girl, before being exposed to school and other families, I knew something was horrifically wrong in my family. And then when I did start, even before elementary school, going over to my little girlfriend's houses, there were three in particular, and I saw how they lived, and how they were treated, especially daughters. Um, I remember I would lie. I would actually lie. There was also there were plenty of beatings and abuse, but there was no discipline. There were no rules, like, be in the house when the street lights come on. I remember being, 6 years old and over Patty's house until like 11 o'clock at night, until her mother was like telling me, you better go home, but any mother, including myself, you're going to be looking for your child frenetically, right? She just didn't have that with me. Basically, the more I was gone, the better for her. And again, it was just an interesting dynamic, in that she didn't feel that way or treat the two older siblings like that. Of course, my brother, the only boy, the firstborn, we all adored him, and rightfully so. He's just a beautiful soul. I could do a whole series just on him. But what eventually led up to seeking up a therapist who worked under a psychiatrist who loaded me up on SSRIs and Benzodiazepines. So this is the early history part. She was super abusive. I picked up the phone that day after, that was always forbidden. I thought she was asleep, but I also knew she was revved up that day. The older sister was in the house, who sometimes even participated in the abuse. Maybe not, like with my mother, ganging up at the same time, but on her own. There were plenty of slaps and shoves and horrible words that were said. But this particular day, I picked up the phone. And the odd part was when she came to attack me, there was no screaming like usual and name calling. She just had like a dead stare. And I just remember it was the right side of my face. Boom, boom. Not screaming, not like the spittle coming from her mouth, which would happen in her rage. Just boom, 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 boom. Now, I hadn't started grade school yet. I can't tell you exactly how old I was, but I know I wasn't in grade school yet. And it was winter time. And I don't think she stopped. I think I finally just ran out of the house. We had the older siblings, biological grandparents, lived right next door. All their aunts and uncles lived all around, like houses away. And we always consider them Nana and Grampy as well, me and my little sister. And, there was another thing. I have a lot of respect for my father, in that he married this woman who he was crazy about, and he was surrounded by her late husband's relative. Like, literally, there was right across the street an uncle and aunt, the brother of my mother's first husband. Down the street, another brother. Around the corner, another brother. For a little while, a sister that lived with the parents across the way until she married an international lawyer and moved to Madrid. So he was surrounded and trying to be a stepfather and be a father to me and my little sister, all while, the late husband's relatives were all around. I'm sure he felt watched and like judged and critiqued a lot. I remember them being fairly pleasant in the beginning. But that one day with that just persistent beating on the right side of the face, I ran next door to the grandparents. And I just remember it sticks out so clearly, because it had been snowing, it was winter, and I was just bleeding profusely. I remember the red blood on the snow that is just melted into my mind for life. I'm 62 now, and I can still see it like it happened a minute ago. And ran over to the grandparents. Now, there's something to be said for that day and time that discipline was much more accepted, including physical discipline. And I know when I went through therapy, most of my anger and my hurt, it was certainly at the abuser, but almost more so for the adults around that saw and knew what was happening and did nothing. So at least I got to the safety of this grandparents' house. They lived with an aunt, a biological aunt of the older siblings, and they were both sitting there, and I could see their eyes widen and their jaw just drop. Now, this wasn't the first time, but that might have been the most severe. You could not see my eye. It was just out like this, totally closed, lips split, bruised all over just this whole right side of my face. Gone. There was question about whether there was going to be damage to my right eye, which I know sometimes just does half close, but in any event, I just remember, I think my mother was already ringing the phone, and when my grandmother, Nana, picked up, I remember her saying, Gloria, you went way too far this time. And her response for that, and I know this because my grandmother repeated it, was, I shouldn't have hit in the face. I've got to remember to go below the shoulders. And she really believed that. If I would have fast forward to my first child, I never laid a hand on either of my kids. It just was not an optional form of discipline for me or any man, including their own fathers. Just no. There are a million ways to discipline a child. And even, I know some extremely intelligent people who have spanked their children. What I don't know of is somebody that spanked their children as a legitimate form of discipline. It's usually done in anger, in the spur of the moment, impulsively. That's not discipline, it's abuse, period. So, and this one, those are the two that stick out in my mind the most. But I do have like occasional flashbacks of being real young, like before conscious memories even. And I remember my brother mostly, just always being super protective, and he told me stories later on, as adults, of things that happened when I was a baby. So for whatever the reason, she just hated me, and like any child, I didn't hate her back. I did go through a serious rebellion This went on. My father's alcoholism did, in fact, increase, but he was still functional. He was still going to work. He was still paying the bills. He still loved my mother, and he certainly loved his two daughters. I think his sin was basically abandoning the three children and marriage that he had prior to that. Um, but again, the fact that it was just me, and she went on to have another child, claiming that he was just so horrible. And I know finances had a lot to do with her staying. And she even told me when she realized she could get certain benefits back um, from her deceased husband, and when she knew financially that she'd be fine and she could raise the kids, he was out of there. And he was very, very obsessive. For 5 years it went on. He just harassed her. He was heartbroken. He wanted her back. She immediately started bringing men into our lives, and I do mean immediately. I remember sitting over that same grandma's house and knowing I was 7 or 8, and knowing she was in court that day. And they didn't just give divorces like they do now. It was a process, so I'm sure this went on for months, but the judge was going to decide this day. And I'm sitting over my grandmother's. My older sister is at home, and my grandmother gets the call, and she jumped for joy. She won, she got the divorce. Like I wasn't sitting there. Of course, I'm devastated beyond belief. I run home and I run to my older sister, who of course is also thrilled. And I could see there was no hugs to be given, no everything's going to be okay, just celebratory of the whole thing. So I begged for my older brother, who was down the street, and she did call him and say she wants you. And he did come right home and really spent a lot of time and a lot of love and sitting me down and saying, you'll still see your dad a lot. There'll be visits, and but the next 5 years was just to be an absolute nightmare. Um, he came for every visitation, and my mother will swear, or she did swear till the day she died, that he never gave her a dime. I remember physically, I would be in trouble if I did not get that check when he visited. He was very harassing, but again, it was an obsession with my mother, but it was also trying to protect me in particular. The first boyfriend actually put his hands on me. There was never any sexual abuse. I had a weird uncle that was processed long ago. That's a whole nother story. But there was never any sexual abuse in the house or by my mother's boyfriends. But what it was is I was very, very uncomfortable with him being there. She refused to be discreet about her own personal activities, physical activities with this man. We could hear everything. Me and my little sister, we knew everything. Me and my little sister shared a bed, and a double-sized bed. And I remember this one night I had called my father, and who showed up, and he knew it. So before my father got there, I remember them talking in the kitchen, my mother and the boyfriend, about she just doesn't know what the hell she's going to do with me. I'm out to make her life miserable. I can't believe she called Herbie. Now it's going to be a horror show. He's on his way. And so the boyfriend comes in, sits down on the bed. Me and my little sister are just like wide-eyed. Well, what are you doing in our rooms? Whack! And just smashed me. My ear rung. on that right side again. And he said, you need to learn how to stop causing so much trouble. And again, I loathed this man, and I got to see him later on as an adult. He was married, and he walks out into the kitchen, and I remember my mother praising him. Hugged him. I'm watching from the hallway. She puts her arms around him and said, thank you. I don't know what I'm going to do with that girl. And then, of course, my father showed up, and this guy wants to beat up my father and go after him. Just a real piece of shit. He really was. He had a wife and kids at home. And again, just me. So, of course, I was pretty primed up. By the time I reached puberty, I was beyond my years. I had lived a lifetime. And when boys came into the picture and got interested, of course, like, I clung on for dear life. And the first one blames himself till this day, but it would have been anyone, and certainly every other boy, neighborhood boy, friend, boyfriend, anything. Drugs came into the picture real quick. And why don't we leave it there, and I will finish with part 2 tomorrow. And let me throw in this: if you're seeking help, especially for benzodiazepine management, today everything's electronic, and they can have all your records in front of them, at the click of a mouse. But they should be asking you for this story. I realize for some of you it's very different, and you had extremely different childhoods. This one was mine, and any doctor should be asking you in detail for this history. So I'm going to leave it there for today, and also let you know I've had a lot of therapy. I'm good. By the time my mother died, and really throughout my whole life, I loved her very much. And we were able to have a wonderful relationship as an adult. It was the older sibling that really trashed that. Okay, so that's all for today. I'm going to get out there and get to work early today. I'm so passionate about this. I've been committing to it every day. So I'm trying to get subscribers, guys. Please. I'm at 22. I thought it was 100, but if I can get to 50, I can go live and save a lot of time. We have a lot of things coming up in August. I'm going to finish this series, which is basically my story. All the benzodiazepine documentaries, and people that participated in the Ashton manual, that's all been part of it, is telling their testimonies and how they got to a point where they were prescribed benzodiazepine and what their doctors did and said. So that's the first part of my history, why I was still in the home. I was given away into state custody at 13. So that'll be part 2 tomorrow. Until then, be blessed. Please subscribe. Please just give it a thumbs up and subscribe so we can draw in other people who can also give that testimony, maybe recommend doctors that we can have access to without being in the 1%, and get real help. Because in the meantime, it's all we got is each other. I'm not a licensed medical professional. I can say more than they actually can. And the ones that talk are wonderful. Dr. Yosef, Dr. Daniel Amen, I absolutely love. The Renegade Psychiatrist, who I watched for the first time yesterday. Highly recommended. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.